Oh, that's not right. That's better. Good morning, everyone. How are we doing? I was just setting up some bits and pieces in the background. We had some breaking news coming literally while the intro was playing, so I've had to very, very quickly put it together. We do want to say good morning to Gary Muirhead, who is here, present and correct. Dan Cullen is here as well. Good top of the morning, team players, he says. And Demo Dove, Andy Dovell says, morning indeed. Yes, as I say, there was some breaking news. Literally press the button to go live and an email hit my desk. Let me get to the right place because I need to talk to you about it. There we are. Okay, I'm looking at the right thing now. So we've just had this in from Bobcat. To celebrate the start of production of its new R2 Series 1 to 2 ton mini excavators, Bobcat is releasing a special limited edition run of its top models. Only 50 of these exclusive Premier Launch Edition machines will be produced for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, or EMEA as they call it, making them a rare and highly collectible piece of equipment. As many of you will know, the latest generation R2 series were first seen at Bauma. So they are producing these limited edition 50 of each, which I think you'll agree look pretty damn smart, but not as smart as they look inside. Have a look at this. Oh, see now, I mean, frankly, I'd quite like one of those instead of my gaming chair. Who fancies working in one of those? Yeah, 1 to 2 ton. This is the R2, the launch of the R2 series from Bobcat, and they've got some limited edition machines, and they look like that. I'm not even sure I'd want to sit on a seat as cool as that. Anybody got any thoughts? Would you like one? I bet you would. Let's take that away because we do need to move on. I do need to say a very quick good morning to Jim Turner, who is here as well. Ken Hatcher. What have we got in terms of weather today, Ken? Yeah, we've had the weirdest weather this morning. At one point this morning, heavens opened. I mean, you know that sort of rain that bounces off the pavement? One of those. Absolutely one of those. And I looked out the window about 5 minutes later. Bright sunshine. It doesn't know what it's doing out there. Mark Whiting is here. Andy Thornton is here as well. Dan says, fancy. I'd sit that in my back garden, be ashamed to put that on site. Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of those occasions where if it arrives with plastic wrapping on it, you keep the plastic wrapping on it. Just every once in a while, take a look at what it looks like underneath. Chris Ford says, morning all. A bit of dust suppression in Litchfield this morning. We've had some dust suppression. You know, that vertically descending dust suppression this morning. But it's now bright sunny out there. I don't know what the hell's going on. It's almost like April showers, but quite a few months late. I don't know what's going on out there. Anyway, people, got a great show for you today. It's got some really weird and wonderful stuff to show you, including a trip. I think it's the first time we've ever actually been to Greenland on this show, which is quite an interesting bit. In addition to that, I write a morning monologue for this show every single day, pretty much. And, you know, I like some of them. I really like some of them. I'm quite proud of a few. The one today, I have to say, really quite pleased with it. It's a bit of a mix of reality and maybe a little bit of dystopian science fiction weaved in for good measure. Yeah. Jim says his dust suppression has been booked for about 1 p.m. Same time as the concrete. Marvellous. Marvellous. That's the way it works, isn't it? Right, people. We do have lots to get through, as I say. And some quite weird and wonderful bits and pieces today. So without further ado, let me roll the intro, post the question of the day, and get this show on the road. It is Thursday, the 4th of September. Welcome to the Breakfast Show. I am your host, Mark Anthony, the Walrus of Demolition, the Lord High Chancellor of live streaming. In today's show, Tigercat grinders, spearhead, a Georgia storm cleanup. Some cats, you could guess here, some cats like the cold. Takeuchi gets the mulchies, not the munchies, but the mulchies, and a bell machine like nothing you've ever seen before. Plus, in my morning monologue today, Doomsday. He said cheerfully, Doomsday. The clock is ticking for demolition and construction. Now, before we get on to all of that, very, very, very quickly, let me remind you of our question of the day, and then I'll get back to the chat in just a moment. Yeah, nice, easy question for you. What is a construction or demolition? What is a project you wish you'd been a part of? Obviously, there are some historic buildings in the UK. One that always stands out for me, really, is St Paul's Cathedral. I don't know if I've actually got a favourite building, but if I were asked about a favourite building, St Paul's would probably get the gig. Um, I think you'd be really proud if you'd been a part of the construction of the M1 motorway, the UK's first motorway. But I'm actually going to go personally with any one of the UK's canals. The Way Navigation Canal is nearest to me, and it's also good for fishing. So I'm going to claim that one. I'd love to have worked on one of those canals. Each of them a huge feat of engineering, almost exclusively built by hand, and all of them have stood the test of time. I don't actually know why we don't use them a little bit more often. A couple of demolition projects I've been on where I've seen waste being hauled away by barge. Makes perfect sense if you're nice and close to it. So what demolition or construction project do you wish you'd been a part of? Gary Muirhead, in like Flint, he says the Channel Tunnel. Yeah, I can understand that. Andy Thornton, along the same lines, although he was. I was part of the Transmonch project. That's the Channel Tunnel to those that speak English. I'd like to do that one again with what I know now, I bet. Griswold says the M6 was Britain's first motorway. Was it? I'm going to take your word for it, but I thought the M1 was named the M1 because it was number one. Listen, it wouldn't be the first time I've been misguided, I'm sure. Jim Turner says the old fellow worked on the M1, M25, and other motorway muck shifts. I caught the tail end of the M25. I actually went to the opening of a couple of the sections, including one not a million miles away from where I am at the moment. I was probably one of the last people to stand. Me and a couple of politicians, if I remember, one of the few people to actually stand on the M25 and not be in danger of being run over. We stood there, we did a photo op, and there was a bit of a ribbon cutting. We all moved aside, and the traffic ran through. I do want to stop very quickly to say good morning to Neil Bruce, all the way from New Zealand. Do the Kiwis do good day like the Aussies, or do you have something else that you say? Either way, Neil Bruce, all the way from New Zealand, thank you for joining us. Ken Hatchett is going for the Hoover Dam. Yes, the Hoover Dam. One of my mates, he lives in Australia now, but one of my mates, I won't bore you with the details, but his nickname is Spaniel. I can't even remember why these days, but yeah, he went to the Hoover Dam and cried like a baby. Turns out he actually discovered he had really, really, really severe fear of heights about halfway across, and he had to turn around and literally on his hands and knees crawl back to safety in tears. Morning, Spaniel, if you're watching. Gary says, my claim to fame was that I dug the foundation for the Falkirk Wheel Canal project. Did you? And it's interesting that you mentioned Falkirk. I mentioned Falkirk not so long ago. They are kind of my Scottish team of choice because I collected stickers, and that was the last one that went in my sticker book when I was about 10, probably. Yeah, Falkirk. Wasn't the first bit of motorway what was originally called the Manchester Relief Road? I'm going to need to look this up. As I say, I've been working under the illusion that the M1 was the start of it all. And yeah, we say g'day, bro. I'm doing the wrong accent. I can only apologise for that. I can barely speak English. The Shard and the M25 says Dan Curran. All good answers indeed. What do we got here? Something just flashed through, and I don't know where it went to. Okay, so should we crack on? Yeah, I think we should, because as I say, we've got a bunch to get through, and I'm really quite looking forward to trying to do justice to my morning monologue today. So let's start with a bit of this. Just to show the international flavour of this show. Neil Bruce watching all the way from New Zealand over on Instagram. XCMG India. I mean, XCMG China would be pretty cool, but XCMG India have just joined us. Good morning to the ladies and gentlemen at XCMG in India. Quickly hop over to the chat. The first bridge in the world, Iron Bridge. Was that the first bridge? I can't believe that was the case. Gary Muirhead says the construction of the Playboy Mansion. One, hide yourself away and wait for Hef and the ladies to arrive. Yes, I should imagine. Can you imagine, what do they call it when you see these forensic things on TV? If they had a black light, the ultraviolet. Imagine the interior of the Playboy Mansion. Would look like a Jackson Pollock painting, wouldn't it? I'm gonna stop talking about that now, because I've only just had my breakfast. So big old storm, a hurricane, in fact, over in Georgia, in America, and along come the grinders to clear up the mess. These are the Tigercats. Obviously, there was a bit of mulching going on there. We're going to be going back to mulching in a little bit, but I wish I'd kept the camera on me while that was playing, because I was sat here chuckling like a good one. You remember we were talking about construction projects you'd like to be involved in, or like to have been involved in, and Gary Muirhead said the Playboy Mansion. He then came back and said, inside the Playboy Mansion would look like a plasterer's radio. I actually laughed out loud when that landed. Thank you for that, Gary. Yes, to clarify, Dan says Iron Bridge was the first bridge in the world made of iron. Probably hence the name. I've been to Iron Bridge. I've been to Telford, and I've been to the Iron Bridge. Very impressive it is too. They'd be a great machine for loading trucks. They would indeed, and I know Dan was enjoying the music there as well. I've got some more music coming. Yeah, I think we probably have. Anyway, whatever the weather's doing for you right now, whether it's raining or sunny or whether it's cold or warm, make the most of it, because where we're taking you next is quite different. Back after this.
If you are enjoying this episode, please consider supporting the show. You can leave us a tip at buymeacoffee.com/demolition news.
Yeah, I was sent the video I'm about to play you yesterday, and I originally thought, well, it's 5 minutes and 45 seconds long, and maybe I could cut some bits out of it because that's quite a long video. But the more I watched it, the more I thought, no, this just needs complete attention. So we're heading for Greenland. I'll let the story just tell itself. Greenland, here we come.
Well, she's cold soaked. I've been sitting here since the last weather. Let's see if it'll start. Good and full. Yes, I'm careful climbing up these icy tracks. 3 points of contact. I know it's become a little bit of an inside joke, but it's a serious thing. And like, had an uncle that worked on cutting I-70 up through the mountains. He ran a D9, D8s. And he told us a horror story about somebody that slipped on the tracks up there when it was icy and actually knocked out most of their front teeth. So that story's always in the back of my mind when I get on these machines. Fluids all look good. And check the water real quick. Oh yeah, we're good. Transmission's good. Engine oil's good. I topped her off last time I ran it. And it's been sitting here for a while, so it's pretty cold soaked. All the fluids check out. Let's fire this thing up and push some snow. This is a 1999 Caterpillar D6M. Now there's two of them here. The other one's a 1997. This one's got the little paddles for the steering clutches. The other one's got full levers. The other one also just came down last season with a certified Caterpillar rebuild. So let's see if it'll start this one here. 15,980 hours. That's a lot of hours. Let the heater cycle. I'll do that about 2 or 3 times. Okay, let's try it. In case you're wondering, everything here runs on a special JP8 jet fuel, essentially. Kind of well, in Antarctica we had an AN8 Antarctic blend, so it's a special jet fuel with additives in it for extreme cold weather. Well, she started, but she weren't none too happy about it. The D6 high drives, and this is not a problem that's unique to here in Greenland. Any cold weather environment, Antarctica too, the seals on the final drives, they don't hold fluid, so we have to pump from the transmission service port or inspection port oil back into the file drives every morning on the 6s. The same thing in tractors at South Pole and Antarctica have the same issues. Not so much in McMurdo, but here this is a daily part of the routine. We just hook up a hose to the SOS oil sample service port on the back of the machine. Somebody sits in the cab, starts it, we pump it back into the final drives every morning. That's the skiway out there. So we're dozing out this outfall out there. I got a lot of material to move and push out that way so that they can access it and drill a new outfall hole. do want to thank you for watching. We'll see you on the next one.
Pretty cool, right? Pretty cool. Pretty bloody cold as well, I would have thought. Let's have a look. Dan Cullen says, would love that. See, America is trying to take over Greenland. The guy's a bleeding idiot, isn't he? Colebrook Dale near Telford. Dan, wonder what it would be worth to weigh in. Cue the hate mail. Okay, welcome to my world. Dan, not surprisingly, I'd love it out in the cold. Chris Ford says, too bloody cold for me. Where that cat is, give me air conditioning and sun. I'm with you, Dan. With you, Chris, rather. And Dan also says, question of the day, what construction project would you like to be involved in? NASA, I'd like a free ride into space. I'd quite like that too. Now, we've had a question here that I can only semi-answer. Gary has just said, can you help me, please? What was the name of the theme tune that you used to use on the show before the 500th revamp? I don't know. There's probably a way I can find out. But what I can do is I can remind you of it. I won't play it all to you because it's, a minute and 44 seconds long. But those of you that have been here for a while, you might remember when the show used to start like this. Seems like a million years ago, doesn't it? Million years ago. That was actually show number 490. I just pulled off the web there. Yeah, Gary, I'll see if I can run that through Shazam later and see if I can identify it. I know we stole it from an online platform called Epidemic Sound. Fred might be able to tell me about it, what it is. He's not here at the moment, but I'll ask him later. If not, I'll Shazam it and see what we can do with that. So yes, thank you for that, Gary. It's it's an earworm, isn't it? That one. I remember. I'm sure I've told you this story before. Not the last Balmer, the Balmer before, sharing a house with Peter Haddock and Nick Drew, and the pair of them humming it every bloody morning. Funny to begin with, quite annoying in the end. Chris Fall says, back in the early 80s, I can remember going to some machines. They were frozen to the ground and wouldn't move. Yeah, absolutely. That I remember, I've told you this before. I interviewed a guy who was working up in Spitsbergen on a Caterpillar wheel loader, and the ground is too frozen for many months of the year, like 8 months of the year. It's too frozen to actually work. And one of the key issues they have is actually that the machine has become basically welded to the ground. Yeah, fair bit of work to get the thing moving along. Dan does remember that. I'm not surprised. Dan, you've been here since the very beginning. Rutland Water, Popplewick Pumping Station, an underground reservoir, the Pantheon, and the Craigside Estate. All very specific. I don't know the Craigside Estate. Popplewick, I've heard of, but I don't know where. Rutland Water. Rutland Water, I only know because it's a bit of a fishery these days, isn't it? I do think they have a few trout in there, or is it pike? Can never remember. I know it's pike country up that way, but if you know, please let me know. We've done cat. I mentioned when we showed you those Tigercats, mulching. We're doing more mulching in just a moment with Takeuchi immediately after this.
Since the finance bill came into effect in April, the construction industry has seen a surge of fuel thefts. The rising cost of living has placed an additional risk of theft by employees and contractors, as well as opportunistic thieves. By using diesel dye and placing warnings of its use, you are sending a clear message that this is your fuel.
Dan says, remember, me and my dad had to light fires under a JCB 805B to defrost the undercarriage. Yep. Yeah, I've heard tale of such things. Never seen it personally, but I've certainly heard tale about it. And warm water into the radiator. You have to be very careful with that. It has to be warm rather than hot in case you crack it. Fairly sure that's a thing. Not that I'm an expert, but yes, let's talk mulching, shall we? And let's do so in the company of those fine folks at Takeuchi.
Hello, I'm Tim Sikora, Product Manager for Excavators here at Takeuchi US. And today, we're here to look at the mulching attachments that pair so well with the Takeuchi line of excavators. From the TB235-2 to the TB290, end users have a lot of choices to meet their mulching needs on every job site and for every application. Takeuchi's advanced technology and superior build quality makes for efficient use of time and resources, felling and mulching trees as large as 6 inches in diameter, leaving behind a fine organic product that is more environmentally friendly and sustainable than traditional cutting, stumping, and burning operations. Integrated technology solutions, such as the bite limiter rotor, which limits the depth of blade action and reduces demand for power, guarantee the speed and exceptional performance you've come to expect from Takeuchi. Our heads are all plug and play, with easy hydraulic connections that feature correct hose lengths, connect under pressure couplers, and preset connectors. In addition, all our heads are pre-tuned at the factory and job site ready once installed, so no setup time is needed to get working. Takeuchi customers also have the choice of direct drive, variable torque, or the next level of forestry mulching, IQ motor control. Simply put, IQ models use the latest in ECU motor control technology to keep the rotor spinning at the optimal RPM and torque needed to prevent stalling, giving these heads the edge against the competition. Working widths from 31 inches to as much as 49 inches give Takeuchi heads all the productivity an operator could want or need. And with multiple teeth options, either blades or carbides, our mulchers can shred everything from pines to hardwoods with equally impressive results. Mulchers that have a door gives an operator the ability to control the mulch output, adding a layer of safety when working in areas where people, structures, and livestock are near the job site. These hydraulically operated doors also keep wood in the chamber longer, allowing the counter knives to shred it into smaller and finer pieces, leaving a thick bed of fresh mulch on top of the soil. Takeuchi mulching heads from the bite limiter line are for our excavators that offer a cab. New to the lineup is the small but powerful TBL-0EX, a direct drive mulcher that doesn't need a case drain and fits perfectly with our TB235-2, TB240, and TB335R excavators. From here, the heads get bigger to match our larger excavators and take on more extreme jobs. The TBL-1EX that pairs with the TB257FR and TB260 has a hydraulic door and thumb bracket for ease of use and maximum productivity. With a shredding diameter up to 6 inches, the TBL-2EX is our most versatile head and can be used with every excavator model from the TB257FR to the TB290. In addition to bite limiter rotors, we have one model of open drum rotor that offers 39 and 49 inch working widths for the most popular excavators in our lineup. The TDML-HY can be carried by the TB257FR, TB260, TB370, TB280FR, and the TB290. Takeuchi's line of forestry mulchers is designed and built to the professional standards our customers have come to expect. For every application and in every environment, Takeuchi gives operators the performance they demand for efficient, safe, and sustainable land management. And for the ultimate peace of mind, all Takeuchi attachments come with a full 1-year warranty. To learn more about the family of Takeuchi mulchers, check out our website or visit your local dealer today.
Good stuff going on in the chat right now. I'm going to come back to the biggest of them all in just a moment. Our question of the day today: what is a construction project you wish you'd been a part of? And Jim has had a rethink, and he said it might actually be Craigside, Armstrong's house, first house to be powered by hydroelectricity. Was that UK hydroelectricity or is that worldwide? I don't know. I'm going to come back to Mike Buffett in just a moment. This is the practical Jim Turner speaking here. We used to have an old tin bath for having fires in for sliding under tractors to thin the oil in winter so they'd start. Along a similar vein, Chris Field says defrosting a nodding donkey water pump with a grease bucket filled with burning diesel. All was going well until the diesel in the fuel tank boiled and overflowed. Soon extinguished it with a bucket of. It begins with S. I've got a funny feeling I know where it's going, but I don't want to say it out loud. Also, the burning rag held against the air intake. All right, providing it didn't get sucked in. Yeah, some practical people in this industry. Now, talking of all things going on in the cold, Mike Wolf, he of Global Highways, has joined us. Morning, Mike. He says, I visited the SNSK coal mine in Spitsbergen, and when it was still operating, they did have a lot of challenges keeping their fleet of Volvo A70 ADTs running. Those are the biggest ADTs ever built, incidentally, with payloads of 65 tons. They drive them on a permanent ice road over a glacier. Whiteouts happened in the worst conditions. One ran off the road and rolled. They got the driver out, and he only had a broken arm. It said a lot for the Volvo C-Series cab that he survived at all. It does indeed. Ice road truckers in ADTs. I'd watch that. Why hasn't somebody turned that into a TV show? I'd definitely watch that. Jim, going back to Crackside and Armstrong's house, I think worldwide he was a pioneer in many things, says Jim. Thank you for that. Speaking of slightly odd engineering, we're going to be back in just a moment with Bell, but probably not as you know it. Back after this. When I think of Bell, Bell Engineering, the construction equipment manufacturer, I think my first thought would probably be ADTs. Some people would probably think immediately of graders. I don't think many people would think of this. Obviously an agricultural machine. One of the reasons I wanted to play that for you was that three-wheel design. Excuse me. The forerunner of the Bobcat skid steer loader was three wheels, two at the front, one at the back. Maneuverability more than you could ever want. Imagine something like that. Well, why don't we have those in limited space operations, like not a landfill, a transfer station, for example? Being able to turn in its own footprint. Surely that's a good thing. Maybe. I don't know. I'm not an expert. And Jim Turner says, yes, Chris, tried the burning rag trick myself, like the old Keller Brothers design. Yes, it was the Keller Brothers who designed what would become eventually the Milrow Bobcat. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You may remember that I actually interviewed the son of one of the Keller Brothers many, many moons ago when I was in the Czech Republic, because that's the thing you do. That's about it for today's show. Hang on a minute. Let me just go back to the chat here. Mike says the SNSK coal mine at Spitsbergen was closed a few years ago, so no TV programs, I'm afraid. It was a dangerous place. The miners had to watch out for polar bears, which would come into the camp scrounging for food. The runway was also built on permafrost, and so long it could land a Boeing 777, just in case one flying overhead and an emergency. Good Lord. Whenever I think of Spitsbergen, I just think of like the cartoon Tiny Little Islands with one palm tree. I realise it wouldn't have a palm tree, but when I think of Spitsbergen, I tend to think of being tiny, not big enough to take a Boeing 777, certainly. So today's morning monologue. I wish I had taken acting lessons because this is one that I mean I'm going to read it. I'm going to try and put a bit of theatrical into it, but it is one that kind of needs a bit more than that. So make some allowances. Not really my strong point, but I'm quite proud of it. So that's about it for the main part of this morning show. I'm going to roll the outro in just a second before leaping gazelle-like over into that morning monologue. If you can't stick around for that, please stay safe. Look after yourself, your family, your friends, and your colleagues. I hope to see you again very soon, tomorrow, for the last show of the day, or the last show of the week, rather. That would be nice. If you do have the time and the inclination, however, I'll be back with the morning monologue immediately after. In 1947, a group of scientists, including Albert Einstein and Robert... I'm going to do that again. I want this to be right. In 1947, a group of scientists, including Albert Einstein and Robert Oppenheimer, and others who had worked on the Manhattan Project, founded the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. Haunted by the destructive force they'd unleashed on the world, they sought a way to warn humanity. They needed a symbol that could communicate urgency, fragility, and danger without a single word. They created the Doomsday Clock. The hands on this symbolic clock could be shifted back or forward depending on how close humanity stood to catastrophe, whether from nuclear weapons, climate change, or more recently, artificial intelligence. Midnight meant destruction. Midnight meant the end. Over the years, the hands have moved back and forth, but never by very much. Humanity, it seems, is always flirting with disaster. Today, that clock stands at just 89 seconds to midnight, the closest it has ever been. Nuclear threats sharpened by the war in Ukraine, rising global instability, conflict in Gaza, a worsening climate crisis, a US president that treats allies as enemies and enemies as allies, and the unstoppable march of technology have all conspired to keep us teetering on the edge. The clock is no longer a metaphor for a distant possibility. It's a reflection of our very precarious present. Now, the UK demolition and construction industry doesn't have a doomsday clock, but perhaps it should. Because if such a clock existed, its hand would not rest calmly at 20 or 30 minutes from midnight. No. This industry, long plagued by crises both slow and sudden, long-standing and relatively recent, would find its own symbolic clock drawing ever closer to catastrophe. Each unresolved problem, each mounting challenge, each missed opportunity for change ticks the hands forward. So let's imagine, and I really want to do this well, so let us set this imaginary clock and trace the minutes as they slip away. The time says 11:40, 20 minutes to midnight. At first glance, the dangers seem distant. The industry's public image remains poor. The industry is viewed as dirty, dangerous, male-dominated and unwelcoming. Diversity and inclusion efforts are tokenistic at best. Leadership is leaden and often absent. Managers promoted for possessing academic qualifications rather than vision or genuine leadership ability. Innovation, though available, is resisted, too costly or too frightening to embrace. Waste disposal grows more complex. Landfill taxes mount, and fuel costs spike with the loss of the red diesel levy. There's an over-reliance on a few dominant Tier 1 contractors, with subcontractors carrying disproportionate risk under skewed and unfair contracts. This leads to ever narrowing margins across the supply chain, discouraging investment in training and innovation. The sector begins to stagnate. These are slow burn issues. They may not kill the industry tomorrow, but like rust on steel, they weaken its structure from within. And so the clock ticks forward. It's 11:45, 15 minutes to midnight. The threats begin to sharpen. Demand itself wavers. Commercial real estate falters in the wake of hybrid working. Office blocks stand empty and projects stall. Housing markets are uncertain, their boom and bust cycles leaving construction in limbo. Government infrastructure promises flicker on and off like faulty light bulbs, each policy U-turn undermining confidence. Onerous and overlapping regulations add bureaucracy, weak enforcement enabling rogue contractors to undercut responsible ones. Planning bottlenecks clog project I will get this right. Planning bottlenecks clog project pipelines, and a lack of long-term strategy for infrastructure stalls progress. Technology, meanwhile, races ahead. Robotics, drones, artificial intelligence, all promise efficiency. But many firms, especially the smaller ones, can't keep pace. Meanwhile, as the world becomes more connected, cybersecurity threats intensify. Brexit's shadow still looms large. Labour shortages, import costs, and a widening gap between UK and EU standards all take their toll. And from further afield, geopolitical unrest sends tremors through the supply chain. Steel, cement, energy, all hostage to wars and instability half a world away. The clock ticks again. It's 11:50, 10 minutes to midnight. Now the threats can no longer be brushed aside as challenges. They are systemic failures. Material costs soar. Energy, fuel, and insurance follow suit. Projects are delayed, budgets shredded, and profit margins are ground to dust. Payments trickle down even more slowly, main contractors clinging to cash while subcontractors suffocate. Regulation overload compounds the pain, with rule after rule adding complexity without clarity, bureaucratic burden without profit. And then there's the environmental backlash. Demolition becomes a dirty word, and even deconstruction is viewed with suspicion. Refurbishment and refit becomes the new flavour of the month. Net zero mandates loom, forcing companies to abandon diesel-powered machinery without a clear or affordable alternative. Transition is demanded, but guidance and support are scarce. An increase in the frequency of climate-related risks like flooding result in ever greater public scrutiny of construction's carbon footprint and disruption. The industry wobbles. The hands move closer still. It's 11:55, just 5 minutes to midnight. Here now, at the brink, the threats converge. Company insolvencies mount. Great and small companies collapsing under the weight of thin margins and broken business models. Skill shortages bite deeper. The workforce grows older while the young remain uninterested, deterred by the industry's battered reputation. Apprenticeships are too few, training too shallow, and a generation of knowledge slips quietly into retirement. The race to the bottom intensifies. Tenders are won on price alone, corners are cut, quality sacrificed. Firms cling to life until the inevitable collapse. And amid it all, a human crisis festers. Mental health problems sweep across the workforce, with construction recording some of the highest suicide rates in the country. Behind every statistic lies a family devastated, colleagues left bewildered, and an industry diminished. Trust disintegrates between client and contractor, between main contractor and subcontractor, between worker and employer. Fragmentation becomes fracture. Fracture becomes collapse. And the hands of our imaginary clock tremble as they move even closer to midnight. The bulletin of the atomic scientists set their clock as a warning to the world, a chance to act before it's too late. The demolition and construction industry has no such clock, no single dial to remind us just how close we stand to disaster. But if it did, we would see the truth, that time is not on our side. And without change, the stroke of midnight is much, much closer than we dare admit. And all of that because I watched The Watchmen again the other night. Yes, there you are. The Demolition Construction Doomsday Clock. And my apologies for tripping over some of the words there. Andy Thornton says, good speech. Also, in terms of construction doomsday clock, every ignored trauma ticks it forward. Every act of empathy winds it back. Mental health is structural integrity. Integrity, the magic word. Yeah. Yeah. But when you actually lay it out, when you actually sit down, and which I do from time to time, when you actually sit back and look at all that's going on, most of which I mentioned there, it's little wonder that we have this mental health crisis. And don't let's forget that we have a mental health crisis across the board. There is a temptation to believe that mental health crisis applies most specifically to the demolition workers or demolition and construction workers on the ground, those at site level. It's not necessarily the case. I know of one demolition director who took his own life a few weeks ago. I've not named names yet. I probably won't because I'm waiting for the family to basically say, they're talking about it. But when you think about all that is problematic within the industry, it's little wonder that strain starts to show on people and that stress starts to show on people. And I know that whole spiel was very dystopian. That was kind of the flavor I was going for. But when you've watched movies like 28 Days Later or Children of Men or The Watchmen, which was the one that triggered this in the first place, it's very rarely, and I realise these are works of fiction, but it's very rarely one thing that pushes humanity beyond the brink. There's usually a bit of a build-up. There might be a zombie apocalypse, but the zombie apocalypse came as a result of, I don't know, whatever it might be, some chemical warfare testing or whatever it might be, and then we decided we would segregate ourselves, and the segregation didn't work, and we become more and more isolated and more a risk to each other. And when you look at the way, if you imagine demolition construction as a structure itself, and when you think about all that is being chipped away each and every day, just chipped away, and one little chip coming off that structure will not bring it down. But lots and lots of chips, which is exactly what we have right now. Demolition construction is not going to go away. We will always need new homes. We will always need new hospitals, new schools, new roads, new railways. We will always need that. But when you look at demolition as an example, demolition in its truest sense could go away. If the environmental lobby get their way, if the refurb and retrofit, or refurb and refit sector gets its act together, I feel like we're in a transition at the moment. Demolition, I think, is currently, as I described it there, a dirty word. Deconstruction, I think, is viewed slightly more positively because it does suggest more control, perhaps, and maybe leading to something else. It's deconstruction in advance of construction. But I do feel like the industry is being sidelined. And nobody is speaking up in its defence. No, I mean, even things like the whole, we've been talking the last few days about we're having to import more and more cement because we're not producing enough cement here. We've got a shortfall in terms of producing our own aggregates. There is a source of those secondary materials from the demolition industry, but nobody is standing up and shouting about that. Instead of which, the environmental lobby is just basically pointing at demolition and saying everything these people do is bad. And that's another chip taken out of the structure. That's my feelings anyway. And Andy Thornton says, I'm sorry to hear that. This is an area where I intend to impact the industry. Yeah, the sooner the better, Andy. I'm off to see Steve Kerslake of Construction Sport to talk about this very subject on Monday afternoon. There will be a show on Monday morning. But once I'm done with that, I'm going to jump in the car and head on down to Essex to record that podcast with Steve. Steve's been on the show a couple of times. One of my concerns, Andy, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, is one of my concerns with the attempt to fix the health and safety issue is, well, first and foremost, I don't think the industry is actually addressing the underlying causes. I think it's coming up with lots of sticking plasters. But my other concern is the fact that all of the solutions seem to be in little silos. I think Construction Sport are doing a fantastic job, but they're over here doing their thing. There's somebody else over there doing their thing. The Lighthouse Club is doing its thing. There's all these little bits and pieces, but there's not an overall, overarching, completely focused attempt to address that issue. And listen, I mean, I'm talking specifically about mental health here, but I would also say exactly the same about the wider issues affecting the industry. Things like late payment. Who is really addressing late payment? The thing that makes me laugh about late payment was one of the people or one of the organisations that's actually put in place some sort of system is Build UK. Build UK is an amalgam of the biggest construction contractors in the country, tier ones basically. Who are the worst payers in the industry? Tier ones. It's like, what is it like? It's like taking the most corrupt police force and tasking them with, eliminating corruption within the police force. They're the wrong people to do it, and unless companies are held to account for late and non-payment, abuse of the retention system, and so on down the line, nothing will change. It would be like turkeys voting for Christmas. Tier 1 contractors are not going to sign up to and abide by any scheme that makes them part with their money any sooner. Unless somebody above them, some form of legislation, some sort of governmental control insists that they do so, nothing is going to change. Obviously, we've got an existential threat as well at the moment from this transition away from diesel and into something else. And again, ivory tower scenario. We've got government and environmental lobbyists telling us that we need to transition away from diesel. Diesel is dirty. Diesel is harming the environment. Diesel is bad. Diesel is awful. And fine, okay. So we've got electric machines. And we've got hydrogen machines coming down the line. Would anyone like to join the dots of how we get from where we are to where we need to be? Because the machines that you're offering in terms of electric are not ready. They're twice the cost of a diesel machine. You're going to lose an hour, possibly 2 hours a day to recharge them. So you're going to lose productivity, which is going to be an additional cost. It's going to make projects run for longer and so on down the line. It's not a solution. You're promising hydrogen machines. Hydrogen machines, yes, they have a huge amount of promise, but they're not here yet. We don't know where we're going to get the fuel. We don't know how much that fuel is going to cost. Again, there's uncertainty. So standing up in Parliament saying we're going to be net zero by 2050. All right. How? How? Have you thought this through? And bearing in mind, I mean, it's only probably 18 months ago that the government put out a consultation document, and I know JCB were actively involved in this, but they'd committed to the notion of net zero by 2050, and then went out to mainly the construction industry or the construction equipment industry and said, how are we going to do that then? And I saw some of the documentation, and they were talking about machines that are tethered, electric machines that are tethered to, a cable hanging out the back. How many applications is a tethered machine actually applicable for? You might get away with it if you're loading ships, from a single location, and all you're doing is slewing backwards and forwards. Demolition site? Nope. Construction site? Nope. That's how out of touch they are. Andy says, agreed, and I'm only a one man. Joined up thinking needs the right strategy and early adopters. However, OCM is my experience. OCM? What is OCM? I'm missing something. What is OCM? I don't know. Andy, tell me what OCM is. But there's, just while Andy is probably writing that. Okay, there we go. Organizational change management. See, again, and I, I'm sure Andy has the very best of intentions. He may have the solution, but as he says, he's one man. And until we recognise that people are taking their own lives now, whether it is the nearly 600 a year, whether they were all directly construction related, who knows? Some may have been caused by something else, and they just happened to be working in construction. But some may well have been construction related. But until we're logging that, we don't know. And we're not logging that. Much the same as we're not logging accidents that may or may not have been caused by the presence of alcohol or drugs. Until you measure it, you can't manage it. And the HSE, God bless them, are not doing that job. So, we're soldiering on. Those at ground level, the people that we speak to on the show, can give you horror stories of people turning up drunk, people falling out the cabs of their machines, stinking of alcohol, people smoking dope around the back of a site cabin before they start work and during work as well. They can tell you all those horror stories. Who's recording that? Nobody. And as it stands at the moment, even if you were to report it, nobody is going to be fired for potentially endangering themselves, endangering their fellow workers, and endangering the public. Because if we fired everybody that was ever caught under the influence of drugs in particular, we'd probably halve our workforce. And we don't want to do that. We'd rather keep our fingers crossed and hope that somebody who is under the influence of drugs or alcohol gets away with it, that they don't hurt themselves, kill their colleagues, kill a passerby. That's the cheaper option. And again, I go back to that metaphor of, the mighty demolition and construction industry. And bit by bit, somebody is chipping out at the bottom of it, a bit like a beaver gnawing away at the base of a tree, just gradually weakening and weakening and weakening. And again, I realise the Doomsday clock analogy was probably going a little bit too far. But is the industry of today stronger or weaker than it was 20, 30, 50 years ago? My personal belief is it's much, much weaker. Even things like the imbalance of, in demolition, we've got some sort of mega companies. We saw that after the CMA investigation, that found guilty, fined £60 million between them, directors banned, but main contractors, clients are still using those companies that were found guilty because they're now of such a size that they are one of the few that have the heft to actually be able to do the work that's required. Do you have 10 million quid in the bank in order to see this job through to fruition? Yeah, we do. Very few people have that. And he says the problem is top down, but the solution has to be bottom up. I wouldn't argue with that. And I mean, again, he is a mate, so I'm probably overplaying it. But construction sport, Steve Kerr's like, Steve is actually out on site. I don't know how often he gets onto site. I know it's a lot, pretty much daily, I would say. Actually going out, meeting people, pressing the flesh, and showing support at ground level. To my knowledge, he's doing probably more than just about anybody. I know Andy Stevens is doing a lot with the Build Network as well. That's what it needs. But that's just two guys, and Andy Thornton would be three guys. How do three guys go and put their arm around the shoulder of 3 million people? You can't do it. Individuals have to stop expecting the company to have their backs and start looking after their peers. Then the organisation will start to listen. And I, funnily enough, I think that is probably the easiest fix of all, because I think intrinsically that is what demolition men and women do. They do look out for each other. I think they need to be encouraged to do it in a slightly different way. I think we've tended to think about looking out for each other in terms of physical well-being. Don't walk under this, don't come near my machine while I'm operating, and that kind of thing. I think what we need is the other bit, the mental bit. Jim Turner says, I asked whether the industry today was stronger or weaker than the past. He says quite simply, weaker management, weaker bank of skilled tradespeople, weaker because more firms run on credit instead of gained and reinvested wealth. Yeah. And I mentioned it. We've got a bank of management within the industry now who have come out of college or university. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for academic qualifications. Wish I had a few myself. But that does not make you a leader of men and women. The moment that you are expecting demolition and construction, men and women, to do something that you have never done, there's immediately a disconnect. And I think that's why you've got some companies with it, certainly the ones that I know within demolition, where the managing director of today, literally started out in the business pushing a broom because his dad owned the company or his granddad owned the company, and he pushed the broom and he washed machines and he cleaned bricks, and he manned the traffic lights outside a site for a bit, and and he's worked his way up. So he's not asking you, or she's not asking you, to do anything that they haven't done themselves for weeks, months, or years. They understand the challenges that you face. They've been there, they've done it, they got the dirt under their fingernails. You have somebody come straight in out of university, I'm going to tell you how to do your job. No, I've never done it, but it says in this book here that this is how it's supposed to be done. You've got that disconnect. And, it's an analogy I fall back on quite a lot. When you think about the inherent danger within demolition and construction, it's very easy to liken it to the armed forces, where everybody relies upon everyone else. That camaraderie and all for one for all, and that kind of thing. In order for that to work, everybody needs to be on the same page. It's no good having a group of guys over here saying, well, we're in it together. I'll watch your back because I know you'll watch mine. We have that phalanx approach. We're all guarding each other. And you've got one bloke over there just come out of college saying, well, I think we should do it a different way. Yeah. And he also says, team dynamics always results in leaders naturally appearing. These are the people who need support, mental health within their teams, irrespective of them being the T-boy or the site manager. Yeah. Totally agree. Isn't it weird? I don't even know quite how we got onto the subject. Anybody familiar with the guy on the TV, Ben Fogle? I think he does a bit around crafts, and he also he's got a TV show where he goes to meet people that have basically given up the rat race to go and live out in the wilds or whatever it might be. But if you remember rightly, those of you that watch that kind of thing, Ben Fogle was on one of the very early reality TV shows, or certainly one of the early British reality TV shows, called Castaway, where they put a bunch of people, like, I don't know, 10, 20 people on an island up in the Hebrides or thereabouts, off the top end of Scotland. And pretty much from day one, Ben Fogle stood out. He's quite well spoken, good looking fella, but he has a way about him that he was almost a leader by default. He was everyone's friend. He was encouraging. He was positive, and people kind of rallied around him. Not that matters, but it's basically given him a career. I think the fact that he can go and spend a week or 2 weeks with a family in some far-flung location, and he's digging out pods with them and that kind of thing, because he's willing to be part of the group. How many of those do we get now? And how many times, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, how many times now are people promoted partly because they have an academic qualification, and also because they need more money to stay? Somebody that's a good digger driver. Let's just take a good digger driver. And you get wind of the fact that he's thinking about leaving and going to join another company for a few quid more. Make him a site supervisor. Give him another couple of grand a year. Now, he would probably be very grateful of that couple of grand a year. But just because he's a really good digger driver doesn't mean he's a good site supervisor. He might be. He might not be. OCM, competent men, like this guy said to me yesterday, I bet there's no men on excavator with a university degree. Okay, there was 2 comments. I didn't see them both together. He said if guys they should earn more. I said operating machine, you don't need a degree. You need intuition, initiative, and safety. Yeah. And there's, funny enough, one of the words that you've mentioned there, and I realise it's got very little to do with my doomsday clock, but we're on a roll now. I don't think you can teach intuition. Women may be different because women's intuition is a whole other story, but I don't think you can teach intuition. I think in order to be intuitive, you need to have experience. You know, you need to have seen things go wrong or nearly go wrong to be aware of they could go wrong in the future. You know, if you've seen a building being taken down, that's the way it's done because this happens and then that happens. Then you start to gain your intuition. Yeah. Anyway, that was the Doomsday Clock, which, you know, is probably up on LinkedIn and various other places by now. I'm going to be back tomorrow for yet more of the same. I was hoping Mick was going to be on the show today because I'm trying to fix up possibly meeting up with him and Dan on Saturday this week, but time is running out. So Mick, if you are just listening, drop us a line, would you? Because otherwise I'm going to have to go and do something far less interesting with my time on Saturday, like clear my garden of all the debris I've created over the past few weeks. Dan says, another fantastic show. Dan, I tip my hat to you. Thank you very much indeed. I will be back tomorrow for the final show of the week. Until then, everybody, have a fine and splendid day. See you soon.